Okay, this is a topic where I'm not really sure how to lead into it, so I'm just gonna sit here and talk about various thoughts that have been in my mind. Now, I've talked before about the fact that Hollywood is very strangely squeamish about romance in movies lately. They avoid it a lot of the times. Other times it just seems incredibly sterile. Talked about it before. But in this video, I want to talk specifically about the avoidance of romance in female-led stories specifically, because I just can't help but see this pattern very specifically in movies that star a female protagonist, very much aimed at the mainstream big blockbusters, and just the complete avoidance of romance. And I don't mean that the story in particular just didn't have a romance or a romantic subplot that was needed for it. It was just a different story in general. I'm talking about the stories that specifically avoid romance. Like, they specifically make a point that the female lead either has no love interest or has absolutely no interest in a love interest, or we'll hear stories from behind the scenes about how things were either completely removed from the story or downplayed comparatively. I just find that incredibly interesting because it's a trend I've seen so much that it can't be denied. And examples of this, well, remember when they were trying to get Captain Marvel off the ground as the big superhero for the Marvel Universe? Carol Danvers has several male love interests from the comic she has throughout the decades, but none of them have appeared in either of her movies or had any pretense of appearing. In fact, in the first Captain Marvel, they gender swapped Marvel, who was a love interest of Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, in the comics, and made it an older female mentor. And in the comics, Marvel is also a figure in Carol Danvers' life. He is who inspires her after his death to become Miss Marvel in part. But obviously, they couldn't have that in a movie these days, having the man be the number one influence in a woman's life. No. Other examples, this is a very, very famous one. We saw Wish was originally supposed to be a love story, the one that they completely nuked. It was also supposed to be have a villain couple in it from Amaya and the King. Were supposed to be the very first villainous power couple in Disney, but they completely shot both of these storylines up. And then, we have the Barbie movie, which also carries out a theme that Greta Gerwig has done in more than one film about someone wanting to avoid the romantic trope. Barbie and Ken are not a couple. It is unrequited on Ken's part. Barbie doesn't have any even inkling of ever being interested in anyone, despite Ken being a character created for that. And so on and on and on. We just see it time and time again that the idea, the main idealized version of a female character these days seems to be the one who just is disinterested in romance in general. And I find that very, very odd. I find it very, very confusing. First of all, the romantic trope is something that's just a trope and subplot in movies in general. It used to just be a given. Like, most of the movies you see with a female lead these days, the main blockbusters that have a romantic subplot, like Little Mermaid or Wicked, are ones that came out decades ago, and so they have to honor the source material on that level to keep it in. But it is an echo of a different time, where typically, whether it's a male lead or a female lead, you would have a love interest of some kind, but not anymore. But I just have to say, it's so odd not to, because it's one thing, once again, just to do stories, and we haven't had a Disney princess that's had a love interest in like a decade, but it's one thing to do a story where it's just not a romance at all. That's not what it has to do with, and you tell your story well that way. But it's just that these various times we see them very specifically avoiding it in stories meant for women. And it seems to come from this sort of idea. We saw it with the controversy of the Snow White movie when they threw it back in. They were originally really, really talking down to the fact that the prince appeared in 2 scenes in the original and that she was wanting love, even though that is very much a subplot in the original rather than the main plot. They really talked down the idea of a woman wanting romance and all of that. And I find it very odd for several reasons, but let's talk about the main reason. I just had to make sure that no one was listening. Women love romance. I apologize. I can't control them. I don't know why they're silly like this. But like, Titanic, one of the highest grossing movies of all time. Oh, the highest grossing movie of all time at one point. $2 billion at the box office. Do you know who was driving the box office of that movie? Women. Do you know who usually was driving the box office of Disney movies? The main audience for Disney movies that were oftentimes romances, like Tangled, for example, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Cinderella. Women. The people who mainly drive the box office for romantic comedies and romance movies in general are women. So, I think that is kind of odd that for every major blockbuster aimed at women that is supposed to be like the major blockbuster, right? Like, we're talking about movies that are meant to be the big hits at the box office, even if they weren't. These are our idealized female characters. These are the ones that we're supposed to connect with the most. Yet, while it's still pretty common in male-led movies to give them a love interest or romantic subplot of some kind, it is devoid in female-led movies. And it seems to be because of this idea, because the new ideal for a female character is she doesn't have a love interest. She doesn't have any sort of romantic interest whatsoever with men. I have to say that because, it's always avoiding it if it's with a man. Sometimes, for example, the Atomic Blonde movie years ago that came out, I just noticed they allowed that character to have a love interest. It was a woman. And then in Captain Marvel, despite the fact that Carol Danvers is a straight woman in the comics and has only ever had a male love interest, the only time they even teased doing anything with the character romantically was in a scene with Valkyrie in the deleted scene, where they were implying that because of shipping online. It is something to note that they seem to specifically be avoiding it with men. Of course, with Hollywood, they also haven't really ever gone full in on having lesbian relationships in their media either. They were trying to for a long time, but now they're backing off wholesale, so they can't really go forward fully in that direction either. So what we get oftentimes is just devoid of romance in general. But I think the main thing, and the reason they don't do the lesbian relationships generally, even though they were trying to push that for a while, is because they still do not want to go up against the various cultures, religions, and places that do not accept that. Still, there were still too many of the mainstream that did not accept that. But I think that the reason why it happens is this idea that a woman cannot be strong if she has a love interest, or that somehow takes away from her agency and story. And I'm not the one who's saying that. Remember we talked about a little bit last year what happened with the Twisters movie, where that does have a female lead. It is an action movie, and there is a romantic subplot in it, but that there was an uproar behind the scenes about there being a kiss between the lead and Glenn Powell at the end, and Steven Spielberg ultimately said for them to cut it. And I have to tell you, I still to this day see women who talk about entertainment, online spaces, talk about how upset they are that they've removed that kiss scene, because women like romance. And, I know this might be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but women generally like romance with men. Like, that's the fantasy in movies. Why? Why is that? Well, it's because of this thing I read about in an ancient text once called reproduction. It used to be a thing that happened once upon a time in the ancient days of yore. And I think that it must still be a thing because there's like 6 billion or 8 billion children in the world. For whatever reason, women really like romance with men. But that's not what you'll see if you read in the spaces online. They'll try to tell you the exact opposite. But no, I'm assuming women must really like relationships with men. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 6 billion children. And I wouldn't be hearing girls thirsting after Glenn Powell in the lobby at the theater. I'm just saying. But anyway, there's a specific avoidance of this romance. And I think that it is ironically damaging the box office for these female stories. I talked about about many, many times. I think this is the biggest mistake in Hollywood history, by the way. The biggest mistake, avoiding what the original story of Wish was going to be. A romantic storyline between Asha and Starboy. That created so much fan fiction and so much lore of fans wishing about what could be, creating their own versions of it and artwork of it. Cosplayers coming out the original version of Wish, not the one that came out, the original version, because girls, the primary audience of Disney stuff, like the romance. Also, it just sounded like a great idea in general. Just such a... That movie could have been as big as Frozen if they had done that. Just such a fumble from their own audience. Also, the removal away from the relationship between Amaya and King Magnifico, which is supposed to be an evil power couple in the original, which sounds like some exciting stuff. But in the new version, the version that they put out with Wish, they have Amaya not really care about her husband. Like, I mean, she says that she really loves him and that she's followed him all this time, but when he's revealed to be evil and they capture him, she just kind of smirks it off. And I'm like, this guy was her husband all these years and she stood by him. Like, if somebody that you've loved and trusted for years and given part of your life to turns out to be evil, you're going to have strong emotions about that. You're going to feel sad, angry, rageful, confused. No, she just smirks at him and shuffles him away because that's the empowerment story. Like, that's what Jennifer Lee and her group of people wanted to portray. They wanted Amaya to be another representation of girl power. She's the one who's helping Asha. She's the one who's going to rule the kingdom. But, their sort of idealization of these female characters, how they would like them to be, means that they can't be humans. They can't actually have human reactions, because that would be the human reaction to someone's husband turning out to be evil. But they want to fit with the ideal where men don't really matter. Her husband doesn't really matter. And so she just is able to get away with a smirk and everyone lives happily ever after. I guess so. But Wish was bombing big time, and these days people only talk about it because of the couples that they wish were in the movie, and most of those people are girls. But I want to talk about this sort of, because a lot of this is from like the female producers and directors behind the scenes. I'm not saying that it always is, but a lot of the times it is, and it's confusing. Because, for example, Margot Robbie is a producer in Hollywood who has she really, when she got her productions company started, she really wanted to champion, she said, female-led movies. And she has done multiple films with the idea of a woman not wanting to give up her agency for love or anything. Because if you have a love interest, then that means you're giving up your agency somehow. But I just think it's odd because if you actually listen to interviews with Margot Robbie and what her tastes are, she loves romance. She said when she was reading the Harley Quinn comics to research them that she loved the romantic moments most because she said, I'm a woman and I can't help it. So it's just kind of funny because I don't think that Margot actually believes that. I think that she, in the movies where she's trying to get the female characters away from wanting male love interests, I think Margot Robbie likes romantic movies. She's made that clear in interviews, but she's like following this new ideology where the ultimate power in a woman would not have any sort of romantic interest with a man specifically. And that just seems so hypocritical. It's also hypocritical is that these women like Greta Gerwig or Jennifer Lee that are trying to remove the male love interest from these female characters, they're all married themselves. And so I'm like, where does this trope come from? Like, where does this trope is that the ideal of a female character who is strong or that we're going to really like is that she doesn't have a love interest? Where does that even come from? Where is this idea that we need to be free from the idea that women only want love or something like that? Like, we haven't had that in years. Like, no one's forcing anybody to get married. There's always going to be busybodies out there in the world who try to tell you how to live and try to judge and try to give you self-help. But, like, no one's forcing you to do anything. We don't have any of that anymore. People are pretty free to do what they want to do. But still, like, most women do seek out, like, relationship in real life. Most people in general seek out relationships. Like, growing up, being a teenager, all my friends had special Pinterest boards of their dream weddings and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions and that there aren't people who are different than that, but that's just it. They're exceptions. Most girls are seeking out romances and romantic relationships, so it's just so odd that you're removing it from everything. It just makes me wonder, what is this trope put out there to circumvent at all? Like, you think that a woman is going to lose her agency just because she showed interest in a man? Like, what if you flipped it? Because we're still allowing male characters to have the romantic subplot, and we don't seem to have any qualms with that. Now, what if you were to say that a male character cannot have a female love interest because that would take away from his story? I don't see that flying, so why are you doing the same towards a female character story? Why do you think that female character stories become completely delegitimized or less great just because there is a male love interest involved? You know, going back to Captain Marvel, she might have done well at the box office in the first movie, but when it comes to, like, the demographics for it, the Wonder Woman movie, that is a movie that got a disproportionately female audience to buy it at the box office. Captain Marvel had disproportionately male. You know what Wonder Woman has that Captain Marvel doesn't? Well, an actual character and icon status, for one thing. She has a lot of empathy and a lot of more feminine traits, even a more feminine costume. She also was allowed a love interest. Captain Marvel was the exact opposite of all those things. That is why she didn't appeal as much towards women. Like, that is the problem with all of this. Like, you're making all of these sort of idealizations of women for women, but you don't actually acknowledge what women want. And that's another thing that could be another video, is this idea that all these frumpy costumes and things are for women because they're not sexualized or anything. They're not objectifying. They're not anything that a man would like, except for you're forgetting that women like to wear attractive costumes and feminine costumes and all of that, and that the frumpy Captain Marvel outfit or whatever you've got is just not very appealing. I mean, are we compensating for the past at all, where female characters were too often used as just romantic interests or romantic subplots? Maybe, but honestly, the more I look into old films and watch them, I have to disagree with the idea that women were not given complicated characters to play and whatnot. Like, just look at the original film Scarlett O'Hara. Like, she is very overly obsessed with a man in that movie, but there is a point to that storyline, and she is a complicated character. That isn't her entire plot. She's a very complicated person. Or look at the various Audrey Hepburn movies. Like, or look at the femme fatales of movies at old. These were characters who were in control of their wiles. They had power over men. They weren't just seeking after men. They had power over them. You don't see any of that in film anymore. It's just a lie to say that female characters were always portrayed as screaming damsels who were desperate for a man's validation or approval. So it's like, what in film are we trying to compensate for here? What are we trying to do? This is not a reflection of what the day-to-day lives of women in real life are, that they just never want to have a relationship ever. It's not a reflection of what they're really looking for in film. Like, women still pay to see romances. They're still the major demographic getting those to be successful. Like, and it's not adding anything. That's the big thing, is if you look at something like Wish, they might have removed all the couples and the romance in it, but they didn't make anything in its place. It's just nothing. And that's a problem with a lot of media these days, is that they will remove things and avoid things, but they won't put anything in its place. It is not a reflection of what the people in the main audience want, and it's not even a reflection of the lives of the people who make these storylines are living. So why do we do it? Why do we do it? Where's any of this coming from? It's like made for an imaginary audience that doesn't exist. That's exactly what it is. Sometimes, like, you know, with the uglification of female characters in video games and the removal of romance from movies aimed at women, sometimes I legitimately believe conspiracy theories that they're just trying to decrease the population of the world so that people don't reproduce as much, because they're removing this from everything, and I have no idea why this sort of idea got into anyone's mind that women don't like romances, or that it is somehow a feminist and empowering idea to say that a female's character story is so fragile that it couldn't possibly handle a romantic subplot in it, or that stories about romance and the pursuit of that, or the failure of that for a male or a female character, are somehow not worthy to be told. Well, there are a lot, back in the day, movies used to primarily be about romance, whether a male or female protagonist, and I would much rather have all the problems that had to do with old film when that was the norm than what we have in this just sort of barren, inhuman wasteland that is film today. But this is the main problem with Hollywood, is they don't actually listen to what any part of their audience wants, and they're not actually making stories that actually reflect what people want to see, what they're feeling, or what they want in real life. Well, this ramble is over. Thank you all for watching. What do you think of this video? Do you like it when I do kind of rambles like this, or do you like videos that are more scripted? Let me know in the comments below. By the way, I have a short film of my own that's releasing very soon, and I hope that you'll check that out. I do have a preview trailer for it here. It's going to be releasing very soon, and I hope you'll support it, and I will see you guys next time.